All the rolling go, where am I to go? Meet Johnny, where am I to go? For I'm a young and a sailor lad, and where am I to go?
Hello, and welcome to Where Am I to Go podcast. Today, we are in Rogers, Arkansas, which is in the northwest corner, basically, just before you cross into Missouri. And we are at a cool little museum that I found that I've been pretty excited about since Joe said he'd talk to me. We are at the Daisy Airgun Museum. And all I know is I've had Daisy Airguns since I was probably 7 years old. They were a big part of my life. And I'm excited to talk about Daisy and where they've been, what they do, and you're the man to talk to. Welcome to Where Am I to Go podcast, Joe.
Well, thanks for being here. And I want to say you're not that unusual. You started with a Daisy BB gun. That's probably the biggest reason this museum exists, is that we're everybody's first gun. Our product is more or less a rite of passage. At some point, you convinced your parents you were responsible enough to have a BB gun.
And then I got shot with it.
Well, okay, we can't cover that.
Okay, sure we can.
Sure we can.
It was covered in Hollywood.
Well,
You'll poke your eye out.
Yeah, you will shoot your eye out, kid. But you know, you bring up a good point that a BB gun is a great way to learn those shooting safety rules, like keep the gun pointed in the safe direction, keep your finger off the trigger till you're ready to shoot, don't point at anything you don't want to shoot, don't load the gun until you're ready to shoot. You know, all those things that people talk about with firearms also apply to BB guns. So it is a good way to teach kids that, plus good marksmanship traits.
Oh, yeah. And also how not to be a vandalist.
And not to shoot things you shouldn't shoot.
Exactly. Yeah, I took out a couple of windows. I remember that the paddling hurt worse than the BB.
I didn't know who I was talking to here.
No, you're talking to an expert. No, the first thing you see when you come into this museum is, as you walk in, you've got a BB gun mounted to the side of your building. Tell us a little bit about that BB gun.
Well, the BB gun is, it's more or less a sculpture. It's an aluminum frame covered with foam and a layer of urethane, and it's painted to look very realistically like a giant Daisy Red Ryder BB gun.
No, it looks exactly like a giant Daisy BB gun.
It's got the leather thong, it's got the lever action, the trigger, and it's 25 feet tall. Leans up against the side of the building, and every time I see tourists out there getting their picture taken, I think that gun's doing its job, because that's why we put it there, so people would come see. Like, gosh, when I was a kid and we traveled Route 66 and laid in the back of the station wagon, we stopped at anything labeled the world's largest fill in the blank.
Oh, yeah.
And we would stop and see it.
Or the world's smallest.
So think about it today with selfies and how popular it is for people to show where they've been and what they've seen. We thought, this is natural. Everybody will want to see take their picture with the world's largest Daisy.
And it's big. And you were saying that when you enlarged it 18.33 times.
Well, 8.33.
Oh, 8.33.
Yeah, 8.33.
Okay, I thought you said 18.
We went from a 3-foot gun to a 25-foot gun.
Okay.
Yeah.
That when you enlarge that BB, you'd be shooting a ping pong ball.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that's all it would be, but a BB is just 0.177 thousandths of an inch. And so when you multiply that times 8.33, you get about an inch, 0.42 or so.
Okay. And as you walk into this museum, which the thing just kind of boggled my mind to begin with, your admission is very, very steep. You're at a whole $2 admission, and you pay when you leave.
If you're happy.
If you're happy.
And we give you a medallion, and I won't tell you what the medallion costs us, but it's not cheap. We do a different medallion every year. So we have people come here every year that have been doing it for, I guess we have about 23, 24 different medallions out there now.
Wow. Yeah. And when you first walk in, you've got your Daisy Airgun Museum case. It says it was a mobile exhibit in the 1960s.
Yes, and I think there's two reasons that case is here. It's very ugly. It has plastic-looking stained glass at the top. But that case would fold up and sit on a pallet. And when Daisy went to a trade show to present their new product line to retailers, they would take this case with them, unfold it next to their booth, and it, to me, is an example of how important the company's history is to the brand. And one of the most important things Daisy owns is its name brand and the fact that it's what's called a super brand. Because if you ask somebody with unaided awareness, if you just say, name a company that makes BB guns, 98% of the time you get Daisy right off the bat.
And what other one are you going to get?
I have no idea.
Because I don't even know there was another one.
There are other BB guns, but you're right. Back when we were kids, it was a Daisy. Yes, it was. And so this, to me, is a good example of the company's pride and its history, in that when they went somewhere to show their new product, they showed their old product too.
Okay, and this is the way that it was displayed?
More or less. We've redone the display. We put a timeline across the bottom, and we redid the fabric in the back because it was old and faded. And I think originally there were 12 or 15 guns in there. We put a few more extra guns in there, and we labeled them all. So we've, it used to be something that the company would update every year and add a new gun maybe, and we decided to just make it all. These are kind of like the all-stars of Daisy. There's a wire stock gun that was the first model. There's a stamped steel
in 1888. Gun. I had no idea that this company was that old.
We will, as we round the corner and walk through the chronology, we'll talk about how Daisy originally got started. But these are just good examples. I mean, some of the first guns were die-cast metal. Then they went to sheet metal, like a stamped steel. There were pump guns. There were break-action guns. And then there were multi-pump pneumatic guns in the 70s that you could pump many times and get 1,000 feet, 800 feet per second out of. There were CO2 guns, scoped models. And then this gun is there, this Model 25 there, is there as a new gun because it also was made back in the 1914s. So it's come back again. So it's a very popular old gun that's being made again.
And one in particular that's interesting is you've got your Daisy Model 107 Buck Jones that has a compass in the stock and a little bit of wood burning there, so you can find your way even if you were lost.
And stay with me on that gun. Keep that gun in mind as we tour the museum, because we're going to talk about the movie A Christmas Story. Right. And how Ralphie wanted a gun with a compass and a sundial. Okay. He says a compass in the stock and something that tells time, the thing that tells time. He was really describing that Buck Jones model, not a Red Ryder. But we'll have to talk about that when we get to the 80s when the movie came out.
Now, another question I have is, has Daisy always been air-powered, or were some of them spring-powered?
Well, the category of air gun, people often ask, what's the difference between an air gun, a pellet rifle, a CO2 gun, a BB gun? Anything that uses not an explosion in the chamber, but a compressed gas of any kind is called an air gun. Okay. So technically, you could include cavemen with a blowgun if you wanted to in the category of air gun. When you get into mechanized air guns, you're right. There's spring air power where you're just compressing a spring. You pull the trigger, the spring pushes the plunger pushes the air and the projectile down the barrel.
Okay, I was thinking that the spring itself pushed the projectile on a spring, but
not so much. It pushes a plunger, but they do call it spring air guns. You're absolutely right.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and the other thing that we see here is that you have several different models on display that are for sale.
We have a complete gift shop in the back, but right inside our front window, we always feature something exciting, something limited edition, something you can't buy anywhere else. This is a replica of the very first Red Ryder that was made. We call it a tribute gun. It's a tribute to the first gun. And the artist who drew the comic strips for Red Ryder, the character, he was in the meeting when Daisy, of course, met. He and a gentleman named Stephen Schlesinger, and they all agreed with Daisy, and Daisy agreed with them that they were going to make a Red Ryder carbine. And so shortly thereafter, a gun that looks just like this, and I'll show you the original gun, a gun that looked just like this was presented to Fred Harmon, the artist of the Red Ryder comics. Okay. and they wrote on it, limited edition, one only, certified, put a gold star on it, and these two vice presidents signed it. Cass Huff ended up becoming president of the company. He was the man that moved the company to Rogers, Arkansas in '58. You're right, Daisy's a lot older than that, and we'll explain all that. And then Robert O. Wesley was their advertising manager. So it just makes sense that they would give the first gun to the guy who drew the Red Ryder comics, after which the gun is named.
Right.
And we have the original gun that was given to him. We've had it evaluated. We've had it taken apart by a man who knows these Red Ryders much better than I do. And he says it's not even a first model, it's a prototype model.
Oh,
So
really?
there are a couple of things about it that are different than a production model gun. And that's exciting. So we offer a tribute to that gun for sale. We made 1,000 of these. I want to say maybe we have 250, 280 of them left, something like that. So that's an attractive thing for collectors.
And the price, $50.
$50 for a very special gun. Right.
Right.
That's a gun that really is in our outlet store. We have an outlet store in our gift shop. And anytime Daisy sends out a shipment, if the packaging is damaged, or even if a retailer sees an open box on the counter, they don't like that. So they take the gun, put it back in the box, ship it back to Daisy. Daisy can't sell it again as new. So we acquire them, and we're able to sell them here at about half retail prices.
Oh, wow.
So that's exciting.
Yeah. And this one here's the Red Ryder with the compass in the stock.
With the compass in the sundial. And
Not the same style as that one.
Not the same style as that one, right.
Right.
This year, well, it was actually in late 2022, October 2022, was the 50th anniversary of our first multi-pump pneumatic gun. This is a gun you can pump up to 10 times. You can load BBs or pellets in it, and you get about 800 feet per second from that gun.
Now, back in my younger days, they made darts for those also.
They did make darts for them, you're right. Yeah.
I never did get hit with a dart.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing. Even some of the very old guns have a notation that you could either single load BBs or load a dart into the shot tube.
Do they still make the darts?
I think they are made still, yes.
Okay.
I think you can still buy darts in some stores.
And did you really get that much more when you pumped these guns up to 10 versus pumping them up to 2 or 3?
Okay. Well, a gun like this Model 880 Powerline gun, 3 pumps is about the equivalency of a Red Ryder BB gun. So
Okay.
if you're just going to shoot an aluminum can in the backyard or shoot some targets, 3 or 4 pumps is adequate. And certainly for BBs, it's adequate. If you're going to shoot a pellet and you want the pellet to travel further than 10 or 15 feet, and you want more velocity, or you're going to kill a pesky bird, or you want to run a bunny out of your garden, or the squirrels are eating up your bird feeder, then you can pump it 10 times. You mentioned the age of the company, and the company is very old, and that's part of why the brand is so successful. Anytime you have a company that dates more than 100 years, and it's multi-generational, and people hand it down from one generation to another, that's where you get the super brand status, where everybody knows your name, as they say. This company actually started as the Plymouth Iron Windmill Company in Plymouth, Michigan, back in 1882. A gentleman by the name of Clarence Hamilton had invented an all-steel windmill. Even the derrick was steel. Most of the time back then, the derricks were wood, the blades were wood. Most of them had a vane on the back. His had a rudder and a counterbalance weight. And not only would it make the blades, the face of the windmill fan face into the wind, but it would also, as the wind changed, the rudder and the weight would cant the blades, the angle of the blades, to more efficiently pick up the wind. So supposedly it was a better windmill. But the problem with a better windmill when you're selling to farmers is they already have a windmill. How bad do they need a bigger, better windmill? And so Hamilton founded this company in Plymouth. He and 15 local businessmen put up their money. They built this beautiful brick building. I mean, if you look at this picture here of this windmill building, you'd think deep, dark depression. No, this is about 1885, I believe the picture was taken. But that's what the workforce looked like. They're all men. They all wore hats. They all wore suspenders. A majority of them wore white shirts, which I would think if I was going to work in an iron windmill factory where you know it's dirty,
Right.
why would you wear a white shirt? But they were cheaper than the colored shirts.
Okay.
So even though maybe they didn't get clean every night, they were inexpensive. And so they founded the company in 1882 and began building these windmills. They hired a nephew of one of the founders to go out and try to sell it. He was traveling about a 100-mile radius because they knew with this windmill weighing so much, being built out of iron and steel, they couldn't transport it very far. And so their market was small. And in 1888, so 6 years, they're in business 6 years, the board votes whether or not to file bankruptcy. And we have all their board meeting books, so we have a record of this and who voted how. But they failed to pass that motion to file bankruptcy by one vote, and that was the general manager broke the tie and said, nope, not filing bankruptcy. About the same time, Hamilton, who invented the windmill, this steel windmill, walks in with this little steel air gun. Now, there were wooden air guns being made in Plymouth by a company that made primarily buckets and barrels and cisterns, anything out of wood that would hold water.
Okay.
They were called the Markham Manufacturing Company. And Markham, in 1886, made a little wooden BB gun, and it would be the top gun in that case, which it looks like a barrel stave that hasn't been built, and it's got a little brass barrel in it, and it's a break-action gun. And Hamilton, being the inventor, looks at that wooden gun and says, I can make a better one out of steel. Seems to be his MO, doesn't it?
Right.
Here's all these windmills out of wood, I can do a better steel. So he builds this little gun, one off, in his garage. He brings it to the general manager of the windmill plant, and he says, Lewis, I think I made this at home. I think we can compete with these BB guns being made, these air guns being made. But he said, I can't make a quantity. We could sell 100 a week. Big deal, right? We could sell 100 of these a week, but I can't make them. I can't make them that fast. We in the windmill company, we have everything we need. It's got a wire stock. We can bend that. It's got a die-cast receiver trigger guard area. We can cast that out of bronze. This was bronze. A steel pump tube was actually, it was a brass pump tube that was plated nickel and a brass barrel that was plated nickel. And there was a little bit of soldering here on this piece, a lot of lead filling in there. But anyway, he gives it to Lewis and he says, try this out. Well, Lewis cocks the gun. It's hinged where the stock meets the receiver area, and you actually cocked it by pulling up on the rear side, a big long cocking piece.
Okay.
That pulled back a V-shaped piece of wire with a straight wire. There was the spring, and then there was a die-cast plunger head that looked like an old wooden spool, but it was made out of bronze.
Okay.
And that had been wrapped with candle wicking and dipped in beeswax. So when you assemble this gun, and you did that, and you dipped it in the beeswax and put that plunger into this large tube, it's an airtight fit. So when he cocks the gun, it pulls all that back. It was a spring action gun, like you called it, and that's what it was. And then when you release the trigger, the plunger head forces all of the air down this large pump tube, but more so than all of that air has to go out this small, back then I think it was .168 caliber barrel.
Okay.
So a lot of heat, a lot of compression, a lot more speed, a lot more velocity coming out of the small barrel. So that's how he cocked it and shot it. He does it in his wastebasket. He goes outside behind the building, props a shingle against the stump. He shoots it, it splits the shingle. And he says to Clarence Hamilton, the inventor of the windmill and the inventor of this gun, Clarence, it's a daisy. And well, we're asked all the time, was Daisy the founder's wife's name? Is it named after flowers? And in early advertising, Daisy did put some daisy flowers in their ads just to kind of build
the
recognition.
Association, yeah.
Yeah, but technically, it's named after a colloquialism. Today, he might have said, that's really cool, Clarence, or that's awesome, or radical, as the kids would say today. You know?
Right.
I mean, it was just the saying. So the first guns are embossed on this top cocking lever, Plymouth Iron Windmill Co., Plymouth Mish, patent applied for, Daisy. And Daisy was just the name of the gun, not the company.
Right.
But by 1895, the windmill company proceeded to not do well, and the airgun business took off immediately. And they changed the name of the corporation to Daisy Manufacturing in 1895.
Wow, that's pretty fast.
It was, if you think about it, from 1888 was the first gun. It was patented in 1889. The first salesman that rode around with a buckboard had a miniature windmill on his wagon, and then he had a crate of these guns. And it wasn't until 1930 he did an interview in Detroit to a civic organization, and he said, I used to buy the guns myself from the company with my own money for 75 cents each. I was told to sell them for $2. I was empowered to take as little as $1, and I was permitted to trade a gun. Well, first of all, if a farmer bought a windmill, he got a free BB gun.
Okay.
So it was kind of a premium item.
Right.
I don't know how well that worked for them, but
obviously not as well as it should have.
Yeah. But anyway, he also said I could trade it for 2 nights room and board for myself and my horse in the barn if a farmer would put me up, so I didn't have to ride back to the factory 100 miles, or how far out
Right.
he was. So,
wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Now, with the beeswax candle wick, as far as the plunger and the seal, did you have to reseal that a lot, or did that stay sealed with the plunger?
I've often wondered that myself. To the best of my knowledge, it stayed in there. It stayed as an airtight seal. Because it just rode in that barrel. It didn't jiggle around, or there wasn't a lot of wear to it. I'll tell you that 120 years after that first gun was made in 1888, so that would be 2008, this museum, with Daisy, of course, on a dedicated assembly facility, we built 1,000 of those guns.
Really?
We took micrometers to parts. We had the assembly drawings, though. Those are the original patent drawings. And then we brought in some collectors and tore several guns apart, mic'd all the parts and drew them out, produced all the parts, assembled the guns. And it was a one-at-a-time building process. That was not a production line gun. That was one where you sat down and sweated your parts together and fitted your parts together and wrapped your candle wicking and dipped it in the beeswax.
Huh. Now my mind is totally blown here. We're going to get off of Daisy for a minute, because you've got 1600 to 1800 year antique air guns. I had absolutely no clue that they were making air guns in the 1600s.
Well, and you can't quiz me a lot about this because I'm not an expert on that. I'm a Daisy guy. But I'll tell you that the gentleman who said the words, "It's a Daisy," his son, Edward, became president of the company. His son, Cass Huff, became president of the company. And Cass was a pilot, and we'll talk about that as we move through the museum. But as Cass would travel the world, people would gift him with antique air guns because that's what he liked. And we're very fortunate that he left them at the Daisy Museum to be part of our collection. Otherwise, we wouldn't have those. But antique air guns made in the 1700s were made by firearm companies, and they were probably more expensive to make than a comparable firearm. If you look at them, you would swear that that's an old flintlock up there.
Yeah.
And they do. They look very much like them. But that part of the gun was totally non-functional, meaningless. But
and one even went on Lewis and Clark expedition, it says.
Yes, definitely. And in my opinion is, from what I've learned, Lewis and Clark's rifle has never been found. However, the NRA in their museum outside Washington, D.C. in Virginia has the same model. It's an Austrian gun there named Girandoni. And they have a Girandoni, and it's the same model, and it was actually purchased from the same distributor in Philadelphia where Lewis and Clark bought their guns. So it's a cousin, but it's not the original gun. No one knows what happened to it, I guess, is my understanding.
And it says it's a 46 caliber, which means it's almost a half-inch ball that
exactly.
It shoots.
Yeah, yeah.
How much air does it take to propel a half-inch ball? Yeah. I mean, you know, when you're loading them with black powder,
yeah.
you've got, what, 100-yard range or something like that with a pretty good load. Yeah. And here they're shooting it with air.
Yep, it took an external pump, and that what looks to be a stock, which also looks to be a cast iron leather-wrapped canister. And we do have a couple of guns in our collection. These two, I think if you combine their looks, look very much like that rifle. So they're from the right era. They're just not the same gun. But yeah, you would have an external pump, and you would pump air into that canister, which when the trigger was pulled, again, it's an air gun. It released the air
and the whole stock is a round cylinder that's tapered on both of these guns that you're pointing out, that are probably 18 inches long and would hold a good amount of air.
They're an air
once
tank,
you had them pumped up.
Yes.
And that's what you had for your butt stock that went against your shoulder. That is just amazing. And they look just like you said, like the Kentucky rifle or the old flintlocks, as far as barrel and forearm style.
But I think it's a good lesson for people who say, well, why do air guns look like guns? Because they are guns. They're not firearms. Air guns are not firearms. They don't have an explosion in the chamber, but they're guns. They have a steel or a lead projectile, and it's driven down the barrel at great velocity, and you shoot things with them. So they're guns.
That's amazing. That's just, how did they come up with the 1.77 caliber?
Well, interestingly enough, the first guns that were built either by Markham or by the Plymouth Iron Windmill, and therefore later Daisy, used what they call BB size shot, and that's where BB came from. And BB size shot has changed a little over the years, but it's always been about 0.168 to 1.172. Even today, when people say it's a .177 caliber BB, the BB itself has to be a little smaller than that, or it won't roll out of the .177 caliber barrel. So it's a very tight tolerance, but it can't be the same. It has to be a hair smaller. Yeah.
Okay, and so it was originally like a shotgun shot.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
There was A shot and B shot, and BB shot just happened to be something small that could be driven by spring air.
And were they used, were they lead in the beginning?
Yes, they were lead in the beginning, yes.
Okay, now they're mostly copper or
steel. They're steel, and then they're either flashed with copper or Daisies are flashed with zinc.
Okay, wow.
Let's pick up with Daisy's history from the point that it's 1895 it becomes Daisy manufacturing.
Okay.
I'd like to show you, you made the comment earlier about how quickly the company grew, and it did, from the windmill business to becoming Daisy Manufacturing. But even from that time forward, we have a lithograph in our museum that shows a Daisy campus up in Plymouth, Michigan, and reports foreign branches in London, Paris, Hamburg, Shanghai, Calcutta, Melbourne, Australia, all over the world. They're selling BB guns. And you think, when could that be? That's 1915.
So in 20 years, they went from this building that looks, what was this? Probably 2 stories and 7,000 square feet?
I would call that a good estimate.
To where you've got a campus with like 10 of these buildings, and all of them are 4 stories, 3 stories.
And that is the 2-story building to which a story has been added.
Oh, really?
Yes, we have the fire insurance records that show when that building was enlarged.
But the other 5 or 6 buildings on this campus are 4 times bigger than that.
They're all very large, aren't
wow,
they?
And then all the foreign branches. That is amazing. So they were selling these things all over the world.
All over the world.
And in Sears Roebuck catalog.
Definitely. Sears, Montgomery Ward's, Western Auto Store. Well, not back then, but Sears and Ward's, yeah. And people ask, so why would they abandon that and come to Rogers, Arkansas? And why, of all places, Rogers, Arkansas? And that's a story worth understanding, but because if these buildings all date between 1895 and 1915, then in 1950s, they were 40 to 65 years old.
Right.
And it would be about like if you wanted to move your manufacturing facility, a computer business or something, you wouldn't go into an old downtown building like we're in today, standing here right now.
No.
You'd pick a new location. The same thing with that. But by the 50s, by even the 40s, they recognized that in Plymouth, Michigan, with some very hard winters, you didn't need to be moving product from one 3-story building up and down to another 3-story building to package it. And eventually Daisy acquired the Markham Company, and it was on the other side of the railroad tracks, and they used that for their shipping facility.
Okay.
So they were moving things from one floor to another, one building to another, eventually taking it across the railroad tracks to ship it. And you'll notice this is a photograph similar to this lithograph that was in the early mid-40s, and you'll see at least they've connected some of the buildings.
Right.
But everybody knew by 1950 that the way you manufactured is you poured a big concrete slab, you brought your raw product in one end of the building, you did all your processes, you packaged it, and the railroad switcher line came right into the building, you loaded your product, and there it went, you shipped it out. And that was the efficient way to do it. So, why Rogers is even a stranger story.
Okay.
The grandson of the man who said the word "It's a Daisy," a guy named Cass Huff, had been a pilot in World War II. He came home with a couple of airplanes. He would fly around the country. He would call on Daisy customers. And on one such trip, he stopped in Rogers, Arkansas to refuel. Landed his plane, got out, liked everybody, said, these are some really nice people. He introduced himself. I'm the president of Daisy. Oh, they all had BB guns. They knew about Daisy. And he said, I'm looking for a centrally located point in the United States with a railroad, with moderate climate, with an available workforce. And I said, if I had that here in Rogers, I'd move my company here.
Wow.
Because I feel we could get an honest day's work for an honest day's pay out of the people of Rogers. And he also said, someday this will be the population center of the United States. And
really?
He was talking about Northwest Arkansas and Southwest Missouri when he made that statement, kind of this whole area. But if you look at the past 30 years censuses, you'll see that it's in south central Missouri, and it moves 7 to 10 miles every census. It moves like south-southwest. So it's headed in this direction. He was a little ahead of his time. He was probably 65 years ahead of his time when he said that. But if you're in Northwest Arkansas and you've seen the tremendous growth around here and all the amenities it has to offer, I mean, I think we're very soon headed in that direction of being the population.
This is really a pretty state. We've kind of covered we came out of Cato Lake, Texas, and we've been traveling north, and the country here is just so pretty. And you've got huge lakes, lots of recreation, state parks. It's a beautiful area.
It is, and biking trails are plentiful around here, and really more so due not to little old Daisy, but to Walmart's headquarters being 9 miles from here.
Right.
That's brought in a lot of what they call the vendor community, people who are here to service their company's Walmart account, or somebody who's here to even to support those people. You need a whole support group of packaging and logistics and all of those type of things to serve that community. So it's really grown up around that, and it's become a wonderful place to live.
Wow. And is Daisy still manufactured here?
Daisy's headquarters is still here. A lot of manufacturing moved overseas. There are some things that are made in the plant that's about 1 mile north of here.
Okay. I won't ask where overseas.
Okay, probably just as well. So our museum's laid out in a pretty simple chronology from the oldest guns to the newest guns. So as you walk through here, you're walking through history, and you also get to see how air guns changed. The original guns that we talked about were a wire stock gun and a top cocking lever, and then they became a break action guns, and then eventually the break action. Really, the popularity came with the lever action gun.
As lever actions probably were popular in the cowboy movies.
Yeah, everything.
Right.
Yeah, sure.
Yep. And then, you just keep on going down through. 1894, 1902, Atlas.
Atlas, Bijou, the Markham Air Rifle Company, all of those, Dubois, all of those companies were eventually acquired by Daisy. And when Daisy would acquire another company, they would keep the best guns, they would keep the best technology, and they'd throw the other tooling in the river, and move on. And Daisy was the survivor, I guess is what you would say, in the airgun business.
Wow. And it's really interesting to look at all these guns. You need to come see them. This is just so many different styles and ways that the actions worked in order to work the plungers, to bring the air, to push the BB. Okay.
All right. And so as we have gun displays that are kind of in chronological order by decade, we also have some graphic display panels that show things that we thought the public would be interested in. Like Daisy made a Buck Rogers. Now this was a toy gun. It shot water, or it made a whirring sound and a click and a flash in the side of it. But Daisy made space age pistols as early as the 20s. And I love this photograph here. All these people crowded around to see the debut of the Buck Rogers Daisy disintegrator pistol. But what I love about that photo is that location in that store is where Miracle on 34th Street was shot.
Okay. And you know what I find amazing about this store?
What's that?
There's not a kid in there.
And it's kind of interesting, isn't it?
There's everybody in there's wearing hats. You got men, you've got women.
Isn't that something?
And all of them are adults.
But think about it, 1920. How exciting was space back then? We really didn't know what it was.
Right.
We had no idea. But they were willing to spend money on a Buck Jones disintegrator pistol. And I've talked to some people in the sci-fi collector world, and I've asked them about this gun and what it means to them. And they said, oh, this gun that Daisy made is the ultimate vision of what a spaceman's ray gun looks like, because no one's ever seen a spaceman's ray gun.
Right.
And so, but if you ask anybody today, draw a ray gun, essentially this is what they draw for some reason. It's really ingrained in people's mind. It's kind of like the Santa Claus in Coca-Cola ads is the red Santa Claus that we all think is Santa Claus.
Well, and another thing that I find interesting is this is the Buck Rogers disintegrator.
Right.
How prophetic that it's in Rogers, Arkansas.
Okay. That hadn't crossed my mind.
1920 and 30 years later, they're sitting in Rogers.
Yes.
Okay, now you've got another set of guns here, and you've got a dipper used to fill converting guns with water. What is that about?
Well, these 1927 guns, there's a pair of them. They're Model 27s, which a lot of times that was the year when they had a new model that we name it after the year. Daisy sold these pairs of guns to a company called DeMoulin in Greenville, Illinois, and DeMoulin supplied the lodge industry with different products that were used for what am I trying to say? Like, not indoctrination, but when we inducting someone into your lodge.
Okay.
And so they would have ceremonies and they would produce these things. So if you read this little card here, essentially what they did is they made one gun into a gun that squirts water. Then they would hand it off to the guy who was going to be inducted into the lodge. They would ask him to shoot the apple off the man's head with this water gun, just like they had demonstrated. But when he shot it, it would shoot the water back into his eye. Not terribly funny by today's standards.
No, that's terribly funny.
But I guess in 1927 it was very. And my question is, come on, somebody must have talked and said, "Don't shoot that gun; it's going to shoot water in your eye." But evidently not, because it was something that they had in their catalog for several years.
And it's called the Demolin trick gun, and they show a picture of a guy shooting water at one guy and then getting it shot back in. How funny. Okay, and then you've got several other BB guns here. Now, you've got the 1916, the Model 40, and you've also got another 1916 through 32 Model 40, which are military-style guns with the stock that goes all the way up like the military rifles did. And the one down here from 1916 to 1932, there's a bayonet that goes on the end of it.
You have found the one thing in the museum that's very, very highly desirable that doesn't look like it'd be worth a dime, and that's that bayonet.
Oh, I'm sure.
Because Mom knew right away when a young boy got this gun that she needed to take the bayonet away from him. That was the danger point right there. Because I don't care if it's blunt on the end, it's going to hurt.
Right.
And so those didn't survive very long. Most of the ones you find today, that is an original gun, but most of the ones you find today will end up being reproductions, and there's very little way to tell the difference in them. But there are not too many bayonets survive.
That's interesting. Yeah. But they were made to look like the firearms that people were used to at the time, whether it was lever action with the cowboy stuff, whether it was pump with bird hunting and that type of thing, where Dad's going on out and hunting birds on the weekend. You had a pump that was a regular like pump shotgun.
And when Dad was in World War I, you had a gun that looked a lot like his.
Yep.
And there were several post-war guns like that. Not so much recently, but major wars there were. This it's actually it's a Model 25. It was an experimental model in 1914, but it became the Model 25, and that gun is still in Daisy's line today. It was designed by a guy named Charles Lefevre. Lefevre was from St. Louis. He contacted Daisy and said, "I've got a pump." You notice up to this point, there's no pump guns.
Right.
And he comes up with this and says, "I've got this pump gun," and He just wanted to sell the gun to Daisy, but Daisy saw in him something very special, and they needed an airgunsmith, a designer, a creative person, and he was definitely that. So many times they offered him a job, and he finally gave in, and he moved to Plymouth, Michigan back in about 1913 or 14. And people that knew him and stories I read about him, every day he came in and said, "I don't work for anybody. I work for myself. This is my last day. I will not be back in the morning." And he worked his entire life at Daisy, and essentially
one day at a time.
One day at a time, he made it through. So
okay, now this pump action, it's got the little hand
the
grip at the front. When you pull that back, does this bar come down in a V shape?
It does. It makes a big V.
Okay, now when you pull that back and you have your hands in the wrong place.
Should you put your finger in there? No, you should not.
It looks like a real finger taker offer.
It wouldn't sever your finger, but it certainly would hurt depending on how fast you slam that lever back up there.
Right.
I think you'd only do that once.
I'm thinking, well, some of us aren't that smart. I'm glad I never had one.
I think we more or less up front, when we were talking about that tribute gun, we pretty much told the story of Red Ryder. The interesting thing about Red Ryder is today, I believe, more people know about the gun than they know about the comic strip.
I'm sure of that, because the comic strip quit, what, 1960?
In the 60s, or mid-60s, yeah. And so, but back then, Westerns were popular. Kids would go to movies and see a serial movie. And there's a lot of things that, as I talk to young people today, I'll point out that Red Ryder always wore the white hat. And you and I know that in old Westerns, the bad guy was in the black hat. Red Ryder was the good guy, or the sheriff he wore the white hat.
Right.
And this licensor and promoter named Steven Schlesinger, who owned the rights to Red Ryder comics, which were drawn by Fred Harmon, they approached Daisy and they said, why don't you make a Daisy Red Ryder pistol? Daisy didn't make a pistol until the 1960s, so this is about 1938 they're first talking. They made the first gun in 1940. But instead, this guy, Robert O. Wesley, who was the vice president of advertising, went in the back room, brought out a little lever action gun, and he'd taken a pen and drawn a Red Ryder logo on it and a horse and said, how about something like that? And they all went, yes, that's it. We'll do that gun. So the rest is history.
Well, even before Red Ryder was on TV, there was a radio show, wasn't there?
I think you're right. I think there was radio before that.
And then you had your
certainly
comic
the comic books were big. And he was syndicated in just about every major newspaper nationwide. So you could read about Red Ryder every day. And then Sunday it was in color, you know?
Right.
And part of Daisy's interest in this, and part of Steven Schlesinger's presentation to Daisy was, your company is naming guns after young men who can be in a movie and they might be 15 years old and they can shoot a gun and they can ride a horse and they're in a Western movie. He said, but what you can't control is what does that young man, the actor, do in real life? And how would that reflect negatively on your company?
Right.
So their presentation, their pitch was, Red Ryder will only do good things, and he will only say things that you would authorize him to say. Not that Daisy had any control, but it was
right. But he was a hero.
He was a hero, and he wasn't a real person.
And he wasn't corruptible.
He wasn't a real person, so he wasn't corruptible. That's right.
That is, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Okay, now we're coming around the corner here, and we've got another display that is court guns, water pistols, and toys. And these were all made by Daisy also, or were these licensed and made by other manufacturers?
A good combination of that. The majority of things you see in this case, unless they say they're not made by Daisy, they were made by Daisy. These are all Daisy guns. I believe all of these are probably, I don't know if there is a licensed product in here. These, I guess, would be considered licensed products because these were toy trucks that were made by Ertl Toys up in Iowa during the time frame when Daisy and Ertl were co-owned. They had a single umbrella parent over them. And so Ertl Toys made a few items for Daisy farm trucks, and then Daisy did license walkie-talkies and little radios and things like that. But the majority of what you see here, they're all I love one of them. I think they call it a liquid pistol. It's a water gun, obviously. Liquid pistol sounds much more exciting, especially in the early 1900s.
Well, you got a repeating water pistol. That must have been able to shoot water in different squirts.
A lot of water. Yeah.
And then you've got Buck Rogers' girlfriend's gun.
Well, that's a little smaller than Buck Rogers' gun.
But you can market it to your sister.
You could market it to your sister. How about this flying top gun? Could that not have been fun?
Oh,
you
yeah.
would put this flying top on the end of this little pistol and turn it and turn it and turn it, and it was spring-loaded, much like a top, and then you would pull the trigger up in the air and it would fly like a helicopter.
That is so cool.
I know, I wish I had one of those.
And then you've got a little tiny cork gun that looks like a 2-year-old could shoot it.
Yeah.
Cap guns, just all
Pop
kinds
guns. This one was called a paper popper. It doesn't shoot anything. All it does is emit a little high beam of compressed air through a roll of paper, and when it does, it makes a loud pop.
Oh, really?
Kind of like a cap gun would, but
and then they've got the rolled paper
here. Paper here in case you need to refill it, of course. Yeah.
Wow, I didn't realize that Daisy made so many different toy type things.
And you know, it's probably because it's not on people's mind, because in the 70s, a couple of the major manufacturers, retailers just said, we're not going to market toy guns anymore.
And I think that's only gotten worse and worse and worse.
And worse. And you know, I tell people, I used to walk around with my finger and my thumb like this and pretend I was shooting from behind the tree. I shot more things with my index finger than I did with a gun. You know?
Or a bunch of rubber bands.
Rubber bands were good, weren't they?
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I went to buy a toy gun for my son well, he's 28 years old now, but when he was like 7 or 8 years old, I just wanted a toy gun for him to play with. Went to Walmart, went to all the different places, and nobody was even making anything.
Yeah.
You know, so that was the 90s, and it was nearly impossible. And I'm going, well, how's a kid supposed to learn how to play Army or anything else if they don't have a prop?
I want to challenge you as the author of this podcast to describe the story I'm about to tell you.
Okay.
Because I think it's a good one, but it's going to take some description to make people imagine this.
Well,
there was a group of photos, black and white photos, taken of some good-looking young boys, 5 or 6 boys, in 1913. This boy especially was kind of identified as that all-American boy look. He referred to himself as George Rockwell. Come to find out years later, that wasn't really his name, but George Rockwell was this young man, 1930, good-looking kid, wearing a white shirt and a tie, and he's got a BB gun in his hand. The next year is when that pump gun I was telling you about,
right,
that Lefevre made, came out in 1914. Well, Daisy got excited, and they wanted to introduce the new Daisy pump gun. Here's this ad for it. The sensation of 1914.
And it's got the same kid with the pump gun.
It's the same photo.
Okay.
Except for
the gun's
put
different.
The gun in his hand. Which, if anybody knows anything about Photoshop today, you'd say, well, give me 10 minutes and I'll put a broom in his hand.
Right.
And that's true. But not in 1914. You didn't have that Mac computer and you didn't have a Photoshop program. So they would blow up. They took a picture of the new 1914 Model 25 gun. They blew that negative up. They took this picture, blew up the negative, cut it out with a razor blade, put it in this photo, and made this ad out of it. While they were at it, they took the string off his shirt.
Okay.
But other than that, if you look at every hair, every wrinkle in his shirt, and the fact that his hand really isn't in the right place here.
Right. No, it's not on the hand grip. It's where I said you'd get your fingers smashed.
Exactly. He's comfortable with guns, you can see in these other photos, so he would have his hand in the right place, except that that's where it was when his picture was taken the year before.
Why didn't they just have him repose?
I wonder that too. He lives in Detroit, and they're in the Detroit area.
Right.
And so, yeah, why wouldn't they just call him back in? But I guess that photo was just too good, and they didn't want to risk.
Well, and then you've got several other photos of him with friends shooting.
It was a day-long shoot, I think, and I love the way they dressed, the little high leather tie boots and the
shorts,
stockings and knickers, and it's very circa 1913, isn't it?
And they're walking down a dirt road, the three of them with guns, just like
side by side.
Their dad's hunting, coming back from bird hunting, and they're walking along a creek.
And then, that, to me, that's what's neat about this museum. Is it's all about Daisy BB guns, but it's all about history and the way people were and the way they behaved, the way they looked, what they did, what they went through.
Well, and in the early 1900s, I'd say all the way through the 90s, guns were an important part of our lives. You know, I mean, now you can't take a gun to a school, but when I was in school and I grew up in a city, people had guns in the back windows of their cars, parked in the parking lot.
Sure they did.
You know, and in the country it was even worse. You know, or not worse. I'm going to say better because
more prevalent.
More prevalent.
Whatever.
Yes.
But sure, it was the way things were, and everybody knew that, and they wouldn't consider misusing it. That isn't why it was there.
Right. Now, is this a Norman Rockwell picture with a dad showing?
I don't know who painted that, but it did end up being an advertisement. There's the little cellophane pack of BBs on the table, and Dad looks like the father on My Three Sons, doesn't he, with the pipe in his mouth, and he's got mom and son, and they've all been out shooting the target, and they're kind of comparing their success rates there, aren't they?
Yeah, the target's all kind of blown out in the center, right where it's supposed to be, but it looks very Norman Rockwell-ish.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
And now this Rockwell kid that's holding the BB gun, is he related to Norman?
No, as a matter of fact, his name was actually George Aloysius Roome, R-E-A-U-M-E. He was French Canadian. His family migrated to Detroit, and the kids made fun of his last name. And so he felt that he thought he might have a future in acting or in modeling, and he was a good-looking kid.
Right.
And he thought the name Rockwell will go over better, be more easily remembered than Room.
He's
And
kind
so
of
he
a
changed his name.
he's kind of a Mayberry.
He
look.
is. He
Kind
is.
of a Ron Howard
He's
look.
Opie, isn't he?
Yeah,
Yes, he does
a
look
little
a
bit
lot
of that.
like that.
Okay, and you've got another picture here of Hunter with his horses tied up.
Well, that's the business that Fred Harmon was really in. Fred Harmon was a very famous Western artist who, this painting, it's an oil painting. It's probably, 48 by 30, something like that.
Right.
And it's an original oil by Fred Harmon. It's called Off Balance. You see that there's two deer out there, and he's kind of missing his shot because he fell over a log or he wasn't in a very good position, and he took a shot, and the horses are spooked, and that's the type of storytelling that Fred Harmon really did for a living. He painted hundreds of paintings like this, and then of course there are prints made, but that was an original, coincidentally donated to us by a descendant of one of the men that signed that first Red Ryder BB gun.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Small world.
Yes. Okay.
So I'd like to talk to you about this movie, A Christmas Story.
I'd like to hear a story about the Christmas Story.
Story about the Christmas Story.
That movie, when it came out, which was what, the late
83.
83, okay. Came out in 83. I went to the theater, and I think I laughed for about 6 weeks afterwards. Everything I saw made me laugh.
Have you seen it every year since?
Just about.
Just about.
Yes. Yep.
It's one of those must-see stories. Well, it's interesting that the movie A Christmas Story is actually like an anthology of short stories written by a Hoosier humorist, try to say that 3 times, named Gene Shepard.
Okay.
And Gene Shepard was born in Terre Haute, Indiana. He stayed in the Ohio, Indiana area. He had a radio show. He was a very funny guy. He's passed away. I've never met him, never got the chance. But people that I have talked to that did know him say that he could start just telling you a story. And depending on how you react, he would change the story and kind of chase after the direction that you're laughing at, and until he had you writhing on the floor in laughter, that he could just make it funnier and funnier depending on what you reacted to. But so each of the scenes in that movie essentially were a separate short story.
Okay.
And he never said that they are autobiographical. However, he drew on his own upbringing and his own parents and his own family in things that he put in these stories. So he comes to Daisy in 1982, the year before the movie came out, and he talks to Daisy's director of marketing. And he says, I need 6 guns for my movie. Here's my script. Ralphie wants a Red Ryder with a compass and a sundial, and I need 6 guns for the movie. And John, a marketing director back then, John says, well, here's the whole chronology of the Red Ryder. There's everything from first model to current model. As you can see, the Red Ryder never had a compass and sundial. And Gene Shepard says, sure I did. This movie's set post-war, in the 40s, but post-war. And he said, I had a Red Ryder then, and it had a compass and sundial. John goes, no, you know what happened? You probably had this gun, this Buck Jones model right here that has the compass and sundial, but it's a pump gun. He said, if you would have broken the stock off your Red Ryder, this has the same 2 screws in it. You could put the stock. Maybe that's what you did. And then you thought you had a Red Ryder. Shepard goes, no. I had a Red Ryder, compass, and sundial. And John argued again. A lot of us think about things we had as kids, and we put them together in our mind. And Shepard didn't agree with that at all. So he said, look, here's the deal. That's the way my movie's going to be. If you know what's good for you, that's the way you'll make your gun. So in 83 and 84, Daisy made the Red Ryder with the compass and sundial. But the character in the movie who's set in the 40s shooting that gun and wanting that gun never existed.
But it does in all of our minds.
But it does today, doesn't it? I talked about this being a history museum and a Daisy museum. to me, this really tells that story. This is what a company went through, any company that made a product out of steel during World War II.
Okay.
Because the first things that were taken away from you were copper and nickel. For example, the first Red Ryder BB gun made had a copper band and a copper muzzle band on it, 1940-41. By 42, the use of copper was forbidden by the U.S. government for commercial products.
Okay.
Fast forward a few years later, certainly into 42 through 45, our company, which made products out of steel, we could use up all the steel that they had in the factory, but they couldn't get any more steel. So Daisy survived in two ways. And when I say Daisy, also think about General Motors and White Westinghouse and Singer sewing machines. Anybody that was making a product, a consumer product out of steel, washing machines, whatever, they couldn't get any more steel. So our company survived by making a couple of wooden toy guns, and it's possible there's a little nail in there holding the sling to the gun or something, but basically they were just wooden toy non-functional guns. So kids could have something while dad's away at the war.
And again, they're military
type looking guns.
You got a Thompson and
I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah.
I think they call it the Commando or something like that. There were two of them made. Millions of those guns were made. The other way the company and other companies survived during World War II is you were given government contracts to stamp out parts for the war effort. And I found this in the old plant when Daisy was moving from one location to another, in a closet in the bathroom.
In a closet in the bathroom.
And it's an ugly case with more head screws sticking out of the corners, and it's worn, and it's not very professionally made, but it's a beautiful display of lots of rings and stamped metal pieces and bushes and bearings and switches and a canister. And we know very little about many of these parts. There's two things we know: that this 37G canister M2 was the munitions portion of an anti-tank shell.
Okay.
And held probably BBs, or at least steel scrap. And then we know that some of these spark plug rings, the copper ones, went on AC spark plugs that went into the Ford engines that were put in the Liberator bombers at Willow Run, about 20 miles from Daisy's headquarters.
Wow. And you've got all kinds of different parts in here.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. And you know what two of them are.
That's about right. And now I made the comment that somebody put this together at the end of the war. And the fact that it has a plate in it that describes it and says 42 to 45 would make you think that that's when that was done. But I did have an elderly man who had been in manufacturing industry during World War II, and he said, "Oh no, that case sat in your lobby. And when a representative of the federal government came to check your contracts, he wanted to see what you were making. He wanted to see one of the parts. He wanted to check it off the list."
Oh, really?
And he said, if you had two choices. You could have it on display and say, "Here it is." And he would sit down and drink a cup of coffee with you, check his list, talk about this weekend's ball game, and leave. Or you could take him out in the plant, and it would take you all day to go to each place in a bin and pull out the part and show it to him. So this was much easier.
Oh, much easier.
On you and him.
Definitely.
And so I think that's probably true.
Huh.
I mentioned that Cass Huff was a pilot. He flew P-38s in the war. And there's a wonderful story called 15 Seconds to Live, in which he describes breaking the sound barrier and pulling a P-38 out of what could have been a disastrous bombing dive.
Wow.
So quite the character, quite the pilot. And we have the flag with all the stars on it, one star for each person serving in the war overseas. And, I said that the two survival methods for a company like Daisy, one was making a wooden item instead of a steel item. One was having government contracts to keep the money flowing, keep your people paid. And the third thing was women who went to work in factories primarily to hold down their husband's job and to have some additional income coming in.
Yes.
And that's how we made it. So, when Mr. Trump told Ford that you're going to be making respirators, it wasn't the first time the government has asked corporations to pitch in and get us out of a mess.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was a big effort. We just did a podcast at the WASP Museum, Women of the Air Force Service. Yeah. And that was an amazing podcast. Mm-hmm. But you also had Rosie the Riveter.
Right.
And in fact, we were talking, and you were telling me that there's a Rosie the Riveter original painting in Bennington at another museum. And we're hoping to see that before we head out.
Good. I hope you do get the chance.
So, yes.
I'd like to talk a little bit about shooting education, because Daisy in 1948, they went into the Detroit public schools and had a shooting education program with BB guns, teaching kids how to shoot, part of the physical education program. They hired a local coach one summer and told them, we want you to write the curriculum, because we know how to teach kids to shoot, but we've never written down lesson 1, lesson 2, and that needs to be done so that others can teach it. And so they created a curriculum that's still used today, verbatim, and it's 10 different lessons on, it starts in the classroom setting with parts of a gun and safety rules and marksmanship skills, and only after, I think, about 7 weeks, they'll actually put a BB gun in their hand and let them shoot competitively. And then they learn how to shoot in a competition. And so wasn't until 1966 that Daisy hosted its first national BB gun championship match. And now it's held every year, July 4th week in Rogers, Arkansas. And it's an invitational match. You have to have won a sanctioned state match, come in first or second in a sanctioned state match in order to earn the right to come to the national match.
Okay.
But at that point, you can become the national champ.
And you guys have target rifles that are made with marksman stocks with the pistol grip and the...
Yes. This is the standard for BB gun competition, this little gun that's got a wood stock and a wood forearm. It is a muzzle-loading gun, much like the first Daisy made. You cock the gun, drop the BB down the muzzle of the gun, and it's a steel shot, and it does stick to a magnet. But other than that, it's interesting that it's of the same design as the first gun ever made by Daisy.
Yeah. And I think I may have taken that Daisy course when I was probably 10 years old. My friend's dad was elk.
Okay.
And member of the Elks Club.
Yes.
And we had a 10-week course that we went in on a night or two a week. Yeah. And they had us sit down and they taught us all the positions, the prone position, sitting position,
you have been
standing
through the course.
Position. And then when we got through, they gave us our hunter safety. That's what qualified us for the hunter safety card.
Yeah.
So
that's exactly right. It's still being done today, very much the same way.
I didn't know that they still had that program going. I mean, heck, I was 10 years old. That was 50 years ago.
The match has been going on for about 58 years, something like that. On the anniversary of the 50th match, we actually went back and found the team that won the first match.
Really?
And brought them back. And you and I are sitting here looking at this, but for your guests on the podcast, we have a big photo of the team the way they looked in 1966.
Wow.
It's always a 5-person team. A lot of times they'll have 2 alternates who shoot, but then they don't count their score. And those kids are available to come back. They can come back the next year and compete. The ones that compete for a score can't come back. But that was the 5 kids and their coach, and Cass Huff, the World War II pilot, by then president of Daisy. And here are the kids and their coach today. We've lost the coach, he passed, but all the rest of the people are very much with us, and we're wonderful people, and it was my pleasure to bring them back to Rogers and let them kind of reunite with their team. And they were excited about it too.
Oh, I'll bet.
They were from all over the country.
That's interesting. Now, did Daisy start this gun safety program, or was it the NRA, or?
No, it would have been Daisy in the late 40s, early 50s. And then, like I say, by, before they moved down here in 58, they had the written, published curriculum.
With the 10 commandments of gun safety. And,
yes, all of that.
And
yes.
Daisy's the one that wrote all that up.
Yes.
That's amazing. Because there's, I mean,
now,
like you said, that's still taught. You know, make sure your target before you pull the trigger, and don't cross a fence with a loaded gun.
Right, that's right. And you mentioned the NRA. The NRA is the organization that sanctions 5-meter BB gun competitions. So the young people that are trained in this, that go to the classes, that shoot in the competition at state and at national level, not only do they know the Daisy curriculum, but then they know the NRA rules for a 5-meter match, how the match is to be set up, how wide the lanes are, how long they are, who can be next to the shooter when the shooter's shooting, how many minutes you get to take each shot, you know, all the rules and regulations for the competition itself, and that's NRA driven, and they do a great job, and they supply people and the expertise to host this national match every year.
That's amazing. Yeah. I did not realize that Daisy was that involved with the gun safety. But there again, like we talked in the very beginning,
it's your first gun.
Your first gun.
Get it right now.
Yeah.
These two instinct shooting pieces, I think, are a very good interest. You can learn how to shoot instinctively without using the sights on a gun, which is something in shooting trap with a shotgun or sporting clays that you need to do, and you can learn it with a BB gun. It's a very interesting process where you take a sightless BB gun, a BB gun with no sights on it, and you learn to just focus on the target, not on the gun, not on the sights, mount, cock, and fire the gun, and you'll repetitively end up hitting the exact same spot every time. Your mind can do it.
Oh yeah.
Until you tell yourself it can't.
See, and what we used to do is hang a board down off of a string, and then we swing that string around, and we stand out there and try to shoot a moving target.
Can I tell you a very strange story?
Yeah, tell me.
The bottom line is there's 2 golf balls on the moon, and on one side of the balls they say Daisy, and on the other side they say Victor.
Really?
We learned about it because we got a call from an estate sale person down in Fort Smith, Arkansas, who said, I'm liquidating the contents of the home of a 103-year-old woman, and there's a lot of things in there that have the name Jack Powers. And the guy called me and told me this and says, do you know who Jack Powers is? I said, yeah, in the 60s he was Daisy's PR vice president. And he says, well, I've got a lot of stuff. I've got books, I've got this, I've got that. And I said, well, send me some pictures. And of course, this is one of these estate sale things where everything's full price today, and then Monday, 20% off, 30, half price by next Friday. So he sends me pictures of a lot of things, and we did acquire some things. We typically don't buy things. We're a nonprofit.
Right.
People donate. But this guy wasn't interested in donating. And when he sent me this top picture of the Apollo 14 group of astronauts, so that's Alan Shepard, Rusa, and Mitchell, and it's signed, their autographs of all 3 astronauts are signed across their bodies, but at the bottom it says to Jack Powers, our most sincere thanks for the Daisy golf balls by Victor. They are out of this world.
Really?
So I called the guy back. He's emailed me all these photos. And I'm thinking, why did all these astronauts evidently come to Daisy? And what does that mean?
Yeah.
And so I called him and he says, well, I said, who are you dealing with? No, you can't go around me. You have to deal with me. I said, no, but what family member? I'd like to talk to one of Jack Powers' family members. That would be nice. Oh, it's so-and-so, it's his son. So I called his son and I said, what? I'm looking at this photograph. This guy wants to sell it to the museum. I believe it needs to be in there. But what does that mean? He goes, means exactly what you think it means. And I said, no, I want you to say it. I don't want to say it and have you agree with me. Tell me what it means. He goes, there's 2 Daisy golf balls on the moon.
Wow.
And I said, how did something like that happen, and how do you know that to be true? And he says, I know about it because my dad made it happen, and my dad would rub his knuckles in my scalp every day and say, boy, I can put 2 golf balls on the moon and I can make you mow that yard or whatever. And he said, therefore, I know it to be a fact because of that. But he says, do you want to hear the story? He says, I'm coming to that house. That was my wife's grandmother's house. I've got to come get it painted, get the yard mowed, put it on the market. And he says, when I come, I'll drive up to Rogers and we'll have lunch and I'll tell you the story. And I said probably the most rude thing I'd ever said to somebody. I said, just in case you don't get here, would you mind emailing me the story today? I said, that is just too important not to get the story. I want the story. So the story goes, and I'll give you the Cliff Notes, but the story goes, his dad, Jack Powers, was living in Washington, D.C., working for the American Sport Fishing Institute, came home late at night, threw open the door of his new apartment and said, honey, I'm home. And this gruff male voice said, I'm not your honey and you're in the wrong apartment.
Uh-oh.
Well, that guy was Al Chop, who was the head of Project Blue Book for the Air Force. He went out and investigated UFO sightings. And then you got Jack Powers. Well, Jack Powers left that job. He ends up at Daisy. Al Chop stays with the Air Force, but he becomes the voice of mission control and the VP of public relations for NASA. So he's voice of mission control during Apollo missions. He invites Powers' and his wife to come down to see some launches, and then he brings a group of astronauts up to Daisy to meet everybody and sign autographs. And the whole thing was just because of a friendship.
Wow.
And Powers gives Chop 2 golf balls. Alan Shepard is a golfer. He gets out there in his big UV suit with a golf club with a head taped on it, and he swings his arm and said, that one went miles and miles and miles, you know, which it did go a long way. But that's the story. The reason they say Victor on one side, Victor Comptrometer was an adding machine company, and they, when the market got flooded with Japanese calculators, the adding machine business went down quickly.
Right.
And Victor responded by starting to buy more companies to increase the value of their stock. And they bought all what they called soft sporting goods companies. They didn't buy football and things like that. They bought Daisy Airguns, they bought Head and Lures, they bought Bear Archery, Ertl Toys, PGA Golf, Worthington Golf Ball Company, and that's the key. So then they had their Worthington Golf Ball Company stamp a bunch of balls Victor, and then some of them, they said, put Daisy on the side. Some of them put Bear Archery on them, you know. And they were only used as giveaways. They were not used as, and this is one of the golf balls, never been to the moon.
Wow. So did you end up getting a really good deal on these, or did you...
Oh, yes. I felt like Mike and Frank on American Pickers. I mean, I'm telling the guy, I said, so how much are they? And he quoted me a price. And I said, no, if that's the price, those aren't going to sell well for you. So why don't we assume it's now Friday and they're half price? So I'll take, well, how many of them? There are 4 of them. I said, I'll take all 4 of them, but I get them for half price. And he goes, okay, you know. But,
well, and to be able to have those in the Daisy Museum.
It's kind of priceless, isn't it? It's kind of a priceless thing.
To be able to be on display where people can see it instead of in a private collection. That is so awesome.
So Daisy did get into the firearms business briefly.
Oh, really?
Initially in kind of a strange way. They had a gentleman by the name of Jules van Langenhoven, a Swedish gentleman, who had invented an explosive type of liquid that you would drop onto cotton, push in behind a pellet, and shoot in a break barrel rifle, and it would ignite and shoot the pellet, but there would be no casing left.
Really?
And Daisy said, well, interesting concept, but we're not selling liquid on the counter with cotton balls and trusting people to mix it correctly. So one of Daisy's engineers conjured up a nitrated cotton fiber and fused it to a lead bullet, which you see in a lucite cube there. And then they sold it that way, where
Now,
you loaded it into the chamber and it exploded because of the compressed air and the heat.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I was going to say, so was there an incendiary firing pin, or just how did
the fact that even today, if you take a high-powered break-action pellet rifle and you put a little drop of oil on the back of your pellet and shoot it, it'll either blow a flame or smoke out the barrel. The compression of the air is enough that it will create a little ignition in there.
Have you ever seen the compression fire starters? No. I can't remember what they called those. They came from Africa, if I remember right, and they were a cylinder with a super tight plunger in them, and you could put your fire starting material in the bottom, cotton or whatever, and then you push it down, and it would create enough compression that it would cause that to catch fire.
I like it.
I'll have to look it up as far as what exactly it's called.
Drop me an email.
It's a compression fire starting system, kind of like the old flint and
magnesium and that type of thing. Yeah. During the time period, so after the VL gun kind of runs its course, Daisy's theory was, if we can be everybody's first BB gun, we can be everybody's first .22. Great marketing idea. And they made some beautiful guns called the Legacies, and they were made from 89 to 91, just about a 2-year period. They made them in both synthetic and walnut. All the guns had octagon barrels. And the problem was they needed to be a competitor to somebody like Stevens, kind of an entry-level gun. And instead, by the time they get done with it, with walnut and octagon barrels and everything they put on the guns, they end up being higher price than an entry-level .22 should be.
Right.
So the bad news is they were not successful. The good news is for collectors is they were not successful.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Now there's not that many of them out there, and they're a nice little gun.
I never even knew that they made a .22.
And while they had the R&D department working on the .22s, a couple of the guys in the R&D departments were building and marketing 50 caliber sniper rifles to Navy SEALs. And they Daisy. Some of them are marked Daisy, some of them are not marked at all.
Wow. I didn't realize that they were building that kind of stuff either.
Made them in several different calibers and delivered them to Crane, Indiana, to the proving ground there. And there's some ex-employees, retirees, that actually went up and shot one at that location.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then over here in the case, you've got your 50 millionth.
You did very well with that.
50 millionth, yes.
50 millionth gun made in 1960.
Wait, 1960?
Right.
So what number are they at now?
I knew you'd ask me that. Another 63 years later, how many more could they have made? I don't know.
They got to be.
I don't know.
Wow.
Another
50 million in 1960.
Yeah.
And this is a gun that's got it looks like it's gold.
It's got a brass plated receiver barrel and kind of a brass looking scope. It was a production model gun, but then they dressed it up and made a presentation more or less to themselves. I don't think they ever sold that gun. I believe that was just kind of a display model for the company.
This is so cool because you have everything.
Yeah.
I mean, the company kept, and this is sponsored by the company. Does the company just donate, or how does that work?
Well, this museum is actually a separate nonprofit. It's not owned by Daisy anymore. Okay. When I was with Daisy, a group of us kind of negotiated the sale of the collection to the nonprofit for a minimal amount of money, just to have a transaction and let the nonprofit own it.
Right.
Our concern, and everybody at the company's concern was then, is that this should always be here in Rogers, Arkansas.
Okay.
If you just stop somebody on the street and say, ever know anybody that worked for Daisy, it's likely they'll say, yeah, my uncle did, I did when I was in college. I came home summers and I worked in the, this kind of thing. So it's very important to this area that this museum stay here in perpetuity. And to do that, we felt the best way was to create a nonprofit that would own it. So it's a 501c3, it has a foundation, it can accept donations. We have something called a Friends membership, that if you're a member of the Friends of the Museum, you have a Friends number, and every time we come out with a limited edition gun, we will email you and say, you've got 10 days to make up your mind. If you want this gun with your number on it, you need to act now. Otherwise, that number goes into the pool to be sold to the general public. So
Wow.
We support the collector's market. We support travelers and tourism to Northwest Arkansas. That's very important to us. That's why we put a 25-foot BB gun outside the building, is to attract attention and attract people who want to come to this area.
Wow. Oh, there's the leg lamp.
There's the leg lamp, yeah. And we keep the movie playing all day, every day.
Oh, really?
And the young man that set up that display for us did it in what appears to be an old-time radio.
Right.
And he put a little video screen in it, so it's running all the time. And let's see, that's an original poster from the movie. These are original photos from the movie. These are all photos from the movie. And this is one of the guns that was made in that time period for the movies, but this one never left Daisy. So it was a prototype for the movie, but it was never used as a prop or anything like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. This is just so much fun.
These are all, we're looking at guns here in this case that are all limited edition collectible guns. And Daisy, certainly in the 80s and 90s, made a lot of these type of guns and numbered them and made something special out of them, whether they plated the barrels or whether they inset a medallion or painted it in a special way. And they all commemorated something like the Gold Rush or the Pony Express. They had one that was a Christmas gift gun, and done a lot of things like that. Limited edition. This Model 25 was made for the company's 100th anniversary, and
Wow.
it was number one of one. It was the only one made, and you'll notice it's got like a mother of pearl finish and gold engraving. And when this museum was created as a tourist attraction and as a nonprofit, we took over this function from Daisy of making limited edition numbered guns.
Okay.
Because if you can imagine, a company that sells thousands of guns to retailers doesn't need to stop what they're doing and make one special gun for you or me.
Right.
And keep track of that and know what number gun you have and who has the next one. And so that's what we do, and we do best. So we've kind of taken that over. So today we always have several limited edition, like that tribute gun, like that 50th anniversary Model 880. And then we do special guns. We do a Downtown Rogers gun, a world's largest BB gun. Second Amendment gun is very popular.
Okay.
Pledge of Allegiance gun, which I tell you can only be shot in a standing position. Don't cross that line. And
With your hand over your heart.
With a hand over your heart, if you're that good of a shot. And we make a fireman's gun and a police gun. And these are great presentation models to those who serve in those capacities.
And then you've got a nice gift shop.
You always exit through the gift shop in the museum.
Because that's where you pay.
Because that's where you pay. That's where you give up your whole $2. That's right. But you pause to put a pin in the map from your hometown, where you're from, or where you're traveling, or where you live now.
I can do that.
All right, look at you. You're actually going to find a blank spot.
Actually,
there.
there's already one right
Is
in
it
my,
really close?
right in my spot. I cannot
You've
believe.
got a friend who's come here this year. Because
Actually, it was
every
Linda.
year-
It was Linda. It was Linda.
Did she do
She
that?
beat me to it.
She beat you to it. Well, a couple of years ago during COVID, this map didn't look half that good at the end of the year.
I'll bet.
And here we are in March, and we're pretty full. You can see we pull the pins out every year and start all over. We take a picture of last year's map and start with this year's. But we also had to add a world map. We started getting, we started getting world travelers coming here.
Well, imagine that, because you've got offices in manufacturing in all those different places back in 1914.
1915. That's exactly right.
That's just amazing.
But yes, in our gift shop, we have the outlet guns. So we sell guns probably at about half what they're sold for new.
Okay.
But we also sell typical tourist souvenirs like caps and t-shirts and pins and books and bottle openers and hiking badges and magnets and postcards.
We collect magnets from everywhere we go, so I'm going to be in there getting a magnet.
We got a good magnet of the state of Arkansas with Daisy up in the corner. We sure do.
Okay.
But we do a great online business also, and we always tell people when they walk out, if you forget something, just go online and order, or give us a call and tell us what you need.
Okay, and you got a website.
Yes, daisymuseum.com.
That is so easy.
It's easy, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So I guess we're pretty much wrapped up with the museum. I appreciate your time so much, Joe. This has been absolutely great. I always finish out my podcast by saying the world is full of wonder. People need to get out and explore. And if you had a childhood, you better come to this doggone museum, because more than likely you had a BB gun at some point in time and it said Daisy on the side. And everybody have an absolutely wonder-filled day. And just as a side note, make sure and check out our Facebook page at Where Am I to Go Podcast. We'll have pictures of this museum listed there. And you can also find us on any place you listen to podcasts. You can also go to whereamitogo.com and hit our webpage. Thanks for listening.
All the roll and go, where am I to go? Meet Johnny, where am I to go? For I'm a young and a sailor lad, and where am I to go?